is the greatest Warthog level of all time? Matter of fact, what is the greatest ground vehicle level of all time? Well, the only way to understand this is to look at every single Halo level in existence and point out the best of the best, and then maybe try to pick out a couple of top contenders. There's definitely a lot to cover in this video, so let's go ahead and start off by looking at the Warthog first, and then we'll talk about the other vehicles afterwards. So for now, let's go back to the very beginning with Halo Combat Evolved. Now, when I think of Warthog levels, typically the first one that just pops in my head is obviously the second level of the first Halo game called Halo. This is like the level where you get to experience a Warthog for the first time. This level was one of my first Halo experiences. I thought it was so cool. I was on a road trip and we had a portable DVD player with an Xbox. My brother bought Halo and I got to play Halo for the first time, and this level was pretty awesome. I thought it was cool, the fact that the Warthog even existed and that one player could drive while the other player shoots, and I think a lot of people had that same experience that I had on this level. You just go camp to camp. It's not too deep, but it is a very Warthog-centric level. You have to figure out some stuff like jumping across this thing here. You get to drive it across this cool bridge. This is a great level, and I think it's definitely one of the top tier levels in Halo. It doesn't mean that the first Halo game only had this one good level. There were other good levels for the Warthog. Silent Cartographer is a good example, though this level does have a bit more on foot stuff than what you can just freely do with the Warthog, though many of us did try jamming our Warthog as deep into this level as we could get it. Assault on the Control Room let you drive a Warthog, though there was other vehicles that you would drive too, so I don't think that one really counts as a Warthog-centric level. But if you want to appreciate the mob for a second, this level was such a fantastic way to send the game off in this epic finale that doing this little driving sequence or a Warthog run at the very end with a timer really just made the stakes feel so much higher than any first-person shooter typically had any right doing back in the day. I mean, you were driving for your life, and sure, the Warthog physics back in Combat Evolved were a little clunky. You could just kind of bounce around and it was fine, but nonetheless, this was such a great example of how a finale could be done right, and they obviously took a note from it later on with Halo 3, and to this day, I still wish that this type of level with a Warthog run was maybe more commonplace in the Halo games. Like, we've only gotten a handful of vehicle run levels, and I feel like they're always kind of a highlight. So I think the Maw was a great example, especially by 2001 standards, to have something like this in a game. But let's go ahead and switch gears to Halo 2. Now, Halo 2 was a little bit different. We did struggle a bit thinking of Warthog-centric levels because in the same vein that Halo 1 had like an iconic Warthog level, or even what we'll talk about later on in Halo 3, Halo 2 doesn't actually have that much when it comes to the Warthog being the main vehicle that you're expected to drive. Halo 2 is very sandbox driven, so a lot of the times you're given multiple options, and there weren't many cases where the Warthog was like the expectation for players to drive. The only level that really maybe is different than this is Halo 2's Metropolis. Sure, the first part of this level you can take in a tank, and it's kind of tank-centric, but there was an option for Warthogs for players who want to go a little bit faster than everyone else. And then after the tunnel section, there's a Gauss Hog, and you are mostly expected to finish the next section of the level in the Warthog, to say the very least. So I think this level does count as a Warthog level. It's not necessarily the longest Warthog level, but some of the encounters are kind of interesting, especially since you have the Gauss Hog this time around, so you have a little bit more power and you can kind of shoot stuff, and that's fun, especially if you're trying to like take out some of the bigger vehicles at the end. It can get a little deadly, it can be a little dangerous, but I think if we had to pick one level that was like the best level for a Warthog connoisseur to go and enjoy from Halo 2, I think Metropolis is the only level that really does kind of take that mark here. Now, there was a cut Warthog run originally planned for Halo 2's finale, though it did end up getting scrapped. There are modders who've kind of recreated it, which is really cool. Who knows, maybe one day we'll get to play this version of the cut Halo 2 finale in some form or another. Okay, then we look to Halo 3, and Halo 3 wasn't as hard as Halo 2 to think about Warthog levels. There's already a couple of good examples, but Tsavo Highway is kind of the first time in Halo 3 that you actually get to jump in a Warthog, and this is kind of later in the campaign than typically you would get to drive a Warthog in. Like in Halo 1 and 2, it's usually within like the second level you're in a Warthog. Halo 3 made you kind of wait till the beginning of the third level after two lengthier levels. Remember, Crow's Nest isn't really the shortest level in the world, so by the time you get to jump in a Warthog, the pacing does feel quite unique, and it is kind of exciting to get to be doing something completely different than just like walking through tunnels like you did for the previous two levels. And you get this huge open area to get to drive in. You get to see the sights of Africa, and that's pretty awesome. Now, of course, later in the level, you do have an option to ditch the Warthog, but you can bring the Warthog with you and you can just take it everywhere you wanted to go. You can try to make this jump with the little cool gravity lift trick that a lot of us did back in the day so we can keep our Warthog a little longer. I think Tsavo Highway is a contender for one of the best Warthog levels, but we have to look at all of the Warthog levels across all of Halo before we can actually solidify like the best of the best. Also, in Halo 3, there are other levels that you could drive a Warthog in, but they're more sandbox open to let you drive other vehicles as well, so we'll talk about those a little bit later in this video. But we're talking Warthog levels right now, and the final level, Halo, is definitely a top contender. They took that amazing concept that we talked about from Halo Combat Evolved, where we had this awesome Warthog run that just made the stakes feel bigger than ever, and then exploded that idea 100 times bigger than what they did before, and made something that was truly unique. They made this crazy Warthog run that has stakes higher than ever. It literally feels like the epic climax of some stupid over-the-top action movie, and I absolutely loved every single second of it. Matter of fact, I would almost argue this level single-handedly re-interested me in Halo back in the day, and I was like, huh, there's something going on with this game that's pretty cool. Now, in general, it's a pretty awesome course. You get to drive around, platforms are falling, you might die once or twice if you don't know where you're going, but it definitely made you feel like the stakes were higher than ever, and the level design itself is actually really impressive. This time around, they didn't just do a straight-up course that had a timer and then like stuff like shaking around. They actually have this whole thing mapped out and scripted out based on the player's placement, and of course, if you go too slow, you will die. But it was unique how, as long as you were progressing, like, you weren't falling behind where the whole map ahead of you was falling apart. It was always like within reason of where you are. So the challenge stayed there, but it never felt like if you messed up, quickly saved it, you were now impossibly behind for the entire Warthog run. And that was really rewarding in a weird way. If you did mess up and then happen to save it, you could still finish off, and then you had this memory of how close it was to you maybe dying during the Warthog run. I don't know. I almost preferred that design better than other games that will do like an instant failure the second you mess up somewhere. Tie this whole section off with the little jump at the end just to really just push in that final idea, and you got yourself a solid level in a Halo game. I'm very, very surprised that they didn't bring a Warthog run back in later Halo games. I understood ODST and Halo Reach. They were kind of these spin-off games. I was surprised when Halo 4 didn't have a Warthog run, but it had that ghost run. Halo 5 didn't do anything, and I thought for certain Halo Infinite, which was really drawing inspiration from older Halo titles, would have done something like this, and it was, of course, nowhere to be found. So to this day, this Halo 3 level is outstanding, and we still haven't had anything like it ever since. Now, if we want to go away from the more bombastic levels and just get a truly fun Warthog level experience, we could talk about Uplift Reserve, and while technically this level could be done in a variety of different vehicles, matter of fact, there's 3 different cutscene endings based on what vehicle you took in. I think the Warthog was definitely a key way that players were expected to perform and drive through this level, at least part of the level, and it's probably one of the best Warthog levels if you're looking for a traditional Warthog experience and maybe a slightly newer game than the original Halo Combat Evolved. It just feels very good how the map winds around. You have these large lanes to drive through, and sometimes there's other obstacles that can come in your way, but more or less your driving ability will actually impact how well you perform in this level and how uninterrupted your driving can be. And that's something that I think is really key here. It's one thing to just throw a Warthog on a level and let you just drive it for a little while, but it's a completely different thing when the level feels designed around the mechanic that you're supposed to be utilizing here. And I think Uplift Reserve is a great example of that. It's a fun level, it's not too long, and you can beat this level very quickly if you're fast enough, but overall, no matter what vehicle you're in, this level just felt really good. Okay, then we have Coastal Highway, and this level, obviously it is Warthog centric for a large portion of the level, though it definitely feels a lot slower than the other types of Warthog levels, and I think it's because the approach to this level is supposed to be very different from what we expect from a Warthog level. This is more about combat and kind of fighting and defending your way base to base and slowly moving up through each section rather than the typical just drive as fast as you can and shoot stuff and run things over along the way. So this one's a little more mixed. It's not necessarily the traditional Warthog experience. It's definitely more combat centric, which is unique and different from most Warthog experiences. So it's going to be hit or miss on how much people love this level. When I think of Warthog levels, Coastal Highway might not be the first one that pops up into my head. I don't think it like ranks in that type of category, but this experience was still good in its own right. I don't think this one's gonna be a top tier contender, but it definitely isn't a bad level either. Okay, but after Halo 3 ODST, when it comes to Warthog levels, things get really strange. Halo Reach still, for the most part, stayed true to a lot of the Warthog experiences, though they definitely tried out other types of vehicles that you could drive. Like, for instance, the first level, you have a truck. That's kind of cool. And on the last level, you can drive a Mongoose around, and that was exciting. I think the truest form of a Warthog level would be Tip of the Spear here, as there are quite a bit of sections you can drive. However, since this game is Halo Reach, of course, in a lot of instances, players ended up shooting while Cat was the driver, and that was what a Warthog experience you have there. On the other hand, if you are the driver, and maybe you're playing co-op, it can be a lot of fun, which was a cool experience. Sword Base was the other Warthog level that you have earlier on, and it works. It doesn't necessarily feel as fun as like Tsavo Highway did back in Halo 3, as it's more just a vehicle to get you to a location, and then you're just kind of there, you do your thing, and you just keep driving on. It's not necessarily as like wide open where you approach the enemies from whatever direction you want. The fact you could do the level in whatever order was nicer, but I think that there's just better Warthog levels than necessarily Sword Base. I think Tip of the Spear is more of the fun sandbox for this type of level. Halo 4, once again, kind of starts to prioritize other types of experiences than the standard Warthog type level, although there are some sections that are pretty good with the Warthog. The second level, while I'm really not a fan of this level for Halo 4, I do have to say driving the Warthog on this level felt nice. It felt familiar, and just after seeing the gorgeous skybox early on in this level, driving a little ways into the level did feel like a Halo experience. And in general, I think a little bit of story exposition when you're exploring a new area and you get to be in a Warthog did feel pretty reminiscent of Halo 1, so I liked that quite a bit. So I do think this level kind of gets a pass here. Then on the other hand, there's the level Infinity, where you also can drive a Warthog. The only problem with this level, though, is this level feels incredibly long. This level, you can drive a Scorpion, you can drive a Mantis later on, and it does just make the Warthog part of the level just kind of like a little smaller section. It's not as significant, it's not as cool. I think it's too crowded with a lot of other elements going on to really classify this as like the classic Halo Warthog level. When it comes to Halo 5, the story might have been all over the place, but I do have to give Halo 5 a little bit of credit. The pacing, as far as what experiences you have in the game, is at least different from the same repetitive nature that we've seen in previous games. Like, this game was known for having a Banshee level very early on, which was unlike anything we've seen from a Halo game. Similarly, around the level Glast, we get a Warthog level, which is kind of fun. I mean, we get these little security gates that open up, and there's this long road, and you get to take a Warthog through it, and it is kind of refreshing to get to drive the Warthog a bit in Halo 5 after some of the earlier campaign levels. Once again, the Warthog always just comes back to being this staple thing that like is a familiar experience that you kind of are happy to get to go into again. And with everything that's going on in this level, it gets pretty wild. This Warthog section isn't all that bad. It's actually built pretty decently. You get to drive around, kill stuff, loop around, and you can kind of drive this section strategically in a way. If this wasn't Halo 5 and maybe it was just built in a more exciting campaign setting, I think this would be more comparable to something almost like Uplift Reserve, but we don't want to get too carried away. This is still, a Halo 5 campaign level, but nonetheless, it's not as bad as maybe it could have been. Okay, then we get to Halo Infinite. This is a little bit harder to kind of figure out because when it comes to Halo Infinite, overall, there is not necessarily the same open sandbox experiences built into levels. You kind of have that sandbox experience in between the individual locations and levels that you normally play in. So the Warthog is kind of just a part of the greater open world experience, and it's pretty good. It's probably one of the most fun parts of Halo Infinite, besides maybe like the grapple hook. Getting to just like jump in a Warthog and just start like running it down some hills, or crashing it, or flipping it, or driving it off a cliff, or just like free roaming makes the open world section of Halo Infinite significantly better. If you could imagine what Halo Infinite would have felt like had they not had a Warthog in the open world section, it would be dramatically different. And I do think that like the game kind of capitalized on the Warthog already being a fun vehicle and then allowed us just to go full ham with it in these large sections. They made the Warthog feel good to drive. I can't really count this this as an individual level, but I do have to really give praise where praise is due here when it comes to Halo Infinite. Okay, so we looked at all the Warthog levels, and we're going to look at the other vehicles and other specific levels after this section. But for Warthog levels, the best Warthog levels across all of Halo, if we had to pick 3, I think we're thinking it's going to probably be the Warthog run from Halo 3. That's probably the #1 spot in both of Luke and I's list. Then Uplift Reserve from Halo 3 ODST. It just was this small, short level, but it was just really fun to drive around on, and the replayability on that level is fantastic. And then Luke and I were kind of split. I leaned more towards Halo, the second level of Halo Combat Evolved, but Luke preferred the Warthog run of the Maw, so I think those are both fair answers, so take your pick on that. And then a massive honorable mention to Halo Infinite's open world with the Warthog. That's kind of like a cheating answer because you have this massive section that doesn't necessarily count as a level, but I think it does deserve that honorable mention. But Elijah and Luke, what about the rest of the vehicles? There's Ghost levels, there's Mongoose levels. Are you gonna make dedicated videos to those even though there's only a handful? Well, no. We are going to go through now and figure out though where the best Ghost levels are and the best Mongoose levels, and then maybe compare them to the best Warthog levels and see where they all stand. So let's go back to Combat Evolved and talk specifically about the Ghost here. There's really one main Ghost section, which is probably where most people experience driving the Ghost in the campaign, which is Assault on the Control Room. And you know what? It works. You get to experience the Ghost, you get to drive it around, and it's interesting. It slides around a lot. It doesn't have a boost, and it definitely feels much more floaty, but also the vehicle mechanics in Combat Evolved always felt really floaty and weird. It's an okay level. I don't think this is like peak Ghost experience, but hey, it got our foot in the door when it came to the Ghosts, so that was really cool. I don't think there's too much more out of Combat Evolved to really be like, look at this Ghost level. Halo 2 had a few more Ghost moments, so we can really start saying some of these levels were more dedicated towards the Ghost. Like for instance, Outskirts, while you could drive a Warthog, a lot of players used the Ghost for the first time probably in the newer version of it that had the boost and more modern controls on this level of Halo 2 in these tunnels. And honestly, while this whole level doesn't necessarily count as a Ghost level, I think that we could probably say that, hey, like this one's pretty close to it. And I think that this was a good example. It was really fun to get to drive the Ghost here, try the new mechanics. This tunnel section is linear enough, but there's a lot going on where you want to take a vehicle and you kind of get a feel for handling the Ghost a bit. You can have some fun with it while you're at it as well. Quarantine Zone was another level that was very Ghost centric. This one's fun. You can take a couple other vehicles like the Spectre, or I think you can jump in a tank on this level as well, even get a Warthog if you wanted to. But I think a lot of people drove this in a Ghost because that's what they were familiar with. And boy, oh boy, is this level chaotic. There's a lot of stuff going on, and you up the difficulty on this, it gets pretty wild. But man, that Ghost did kind of feel like it was ready for the chaos. And I think Quarantine Zone is a very underrated level when we're talking about vehicle levels because so much is going on and it feels incredibly chaotic. But the Ghost is up for the challenge. Like it boosts, it maneuvers at this high speed. You can make a split-second decision that could be life or death, but actually pull away and live and succeed from it. And I think that because of that, this is definitely like a sleeper hit when it comes to Ghost levels. The only other level in Halo 2 that could maybe compete here is definitely not Delta Halo. I mean, you just bump into stuff and try to shoot stuff, so Delta Halo is not really the best Ghost level. But the level Uprising, I don't know what the theme was with this level. It kind of feels a lot like a precursor to the Great Journey, obviously, because this is in a similar location. But in a way, it was like, hey, what if we had a Ghost and we had a river and you drove the Ghost in a river almost like a water slide, and then Uprising was built, and it was kind of fun. We got to like boost through stuff. It gets a little messy. There's some tanks and stuff that want to murder you and some enemies that can be kind of tough, but if you're playing this level without just doing the quick speedrun skip, it actually is a decent Ghost level as well. Okay, Halo 3, what an interesting game. The Storm is a very unique level. You start off in this Warthog, and technically you can bring the Warthog with you a little ways, but it's not a Warthog level by any means. It really actually turns out to be a smaller scale level for smaller vehicles, and I think the Ghosts and the Mongooses both play a pretty big part on this level. Not only can you drive around, hijack a Ghost, and go ham here, this is like a really unique experience where you get Mongooses with Marines with rocket launchers on them, and what a cool concept for a level. I think maybe the AI wasn't 100% there, so when this level originally came out all the way back in 2007, I don't think the Mongoose Marines with rocket launchers ended up being as epic or iconic as maybe what we would visualize that being, because sometimes they would just like shoot something really close by and get you killed or something. This ended up being one of the more goofy moments in the campaign instead of one of the more intense epic moments, but we gotta give it credit for at least trying something conceptually that is actually a really great idea. And it still was fun. It's that like chaotic fun. I think the ghost was the more utilized route, the safer route, and you can be pretty strategic with the ghost here, which kind of sets this level apart for ghost levels compared to other Halo titles like Halo 2 Delta Halo. Now, there's of course the option just to not take a vehicle, or you could, you know, climb up this little elevator and hijack a scarab that way. But how cool was it to just get to like drive in between the legs of this giant scarab thing, fighting it out? I think a lot of people have always downplayed the storm, but it's a good Halo level. Halo 3 ODST Uplift Reserve pops up once again because this level, while it is kind of a Warthog level, it very much so could also be seen as a ghost level. Matter of fact, there are some routes to this level, like that speedrunners use, that you can only do if you're in a ghost, and the ghost is the fastest vehicle to use here. But man, if you've ever wanted to try to like dip your toes into speedrunning, Uplift Reserve is such a fun level in a ghost to get to just boost your way through, finding all these little shortcuts, doing a little air brake stall right here to get over this railing before you get into the zoo area, and then of course just taking that ghost across the bridge, climbing up these little shortcuts in the cliffs here at the end of the level. It's really cool to get to drive a ghost on this level. And then we're not going to talk too much about choppers in the campaign because there's just like some Halo 3 moments and Uplift Reserve. But man, if you've played ODST, this level also feels great in a chopper. You can get a chopper very early on in the level also. And if you're trying to go for the Vidmaster Classic achievement, or just, I think it's called Classic in MCC, you have to complete the level without shooting. The chopper is a great vehicle to use. You can just kind of aggressively boost your way through it. Look how versatile Uplift Reserve actually is. Okay, then the Mongoose comes into play here one more time also, because while maybe that rocket launcher idea from Halo 3 didn't work perfectly, it was brought back one more time in a unique way where players this time were expected to utilize rocket launchers and Mongooses in the form of legendary difficulty, specifically if you're going for like the Deja Vu achievement, where you can find Mongooses down below in the tunnel if you don't jump into a vehicle, and unlimited rocket launchers, which is such a cool thing. This is a really interesting way to experience this level. It is very challenging and chaotic, but man, did it create a completely unique experience of driving the Mongoose and having to go for this like rocket launcher intense battle through the last level of Coastal Highway. We said Coastal Highway was weird earlier, but while the Warthog section of this level is interesting, how it's very different from Warthog levels, this is a really great example of how a Mongoose level could and should work in the future. We don't get to see too much experiences like this, but when we do, it's definitely noted and neat. Now, if we're talking about speedy driving, of course, Pillar of Autumn with the Mongoose is, of course, kind of that top pick. I think when it comes to Mongoose levels, it's really fun to drive. There's like stuff flying out of the sky. You want to not get stepped on by a scarab, and then there's a little jump at the end. I think they could have made the jump maybe a little more epic, but you know what? This works here, and the Mongoose section of this level was simple but memorable. I think when it comes to ghost specific levels, Halo 4's third level has a ghost run, and despite what you might say about Halo 4, I do think that this ghost run was a really cool idea, and I think that just in general, going full boost down a exploding destructive pathway was really unique. Getting to make these cool jumps that you wouldn't normally think you could make. Then there's all these enemies running around and whatnot. I know this level is still heavily scripted, but nonetheless, there is still a little bit of a challenge. There are some places where you can die and mess up, especially on higher difficulties. I actually, back in the day, thought this would be a good starting point for 343 if they ever wanted to expand on types of vehicle runs in later games, but it seemed like after the Ghost Run, it never was revisited again. I think that's maybe a little bit sad. Then if we switch gears and we go down the Halo 5 Guardians perspective, there are several sections where you get to drive different vehicles. There's like this Mongoose you can get here, there's a Ghost you can get over here, but one of the more memorable moments is actually that Halo 5 Easter egg that we were a part of the team that discovered. Essentially, if you like stand at this gate 4-player co-op for like 117 seconds, the game will respawn everybody in fresh Mongooses. All the enemies are kind of cleared out of the way, and it is a straight race to the finish. And man, that's actually really epic. It was kind of a cool idea to do this like little kart racer in Mongooses built into a level, and nobody discovered it for a really long time, but this Easter egg is actually a really fun Easter egg, letting you just race Mongooses experiences for a split second, and I think that that is something really cool. Then once again, we get to Halo Infinite, and we run into the same issue we ran into when we were talking about the Warthog, where most of the vehicle experiences are part of the open world, so we can't just like classify that as an individual level. Though I do think the way that they kind of stacked the game, where you start off only being able to get a Mongoose maybe, and then later get better vehicles, was a cool concept. So it forced people to, you know, try out a Mongoose, drive it to a location for once, and yeah, experience that open world, and it felt pretty good. I don't think the Mongoose or the Ghost had like overtly memorable moments necessarily in the Halo Infinite campaign. I think they could have maybe done a little bit more of that, but they're still, you know, the expectation that you will drive these vehicles in the game. You get to drive that cool new red Ghost, which is like Banished themed for a minute, and that's awesome. But yeah, Halo Infinite kind of remains this outlier on lists like this because it doesn't stick to the traditional sense of the way that the levels worked, where, you know, you would maybe play in an individual level driving around in a vehicle. So where does that leave us? What are the best non-Warthog levels, and where do we stand? Well, we definitely think the Storm is up there. It's just got a bit of both going on with the Ghost and those rocket Marines. I think the Halo 4 Ghost run should also be at least given some credit in this case, but there's one level that we hadn't talked about specifically for Ghosts and Mongooses that is just really fantastic. Once again, the last level of Halo 3, which has this Warthog run. Now, if you've gone for the Vidmaster annual achievement, you would know that on Legendary difficulty, 4-player co-op, there's 4 Ghosts down here, and you can choose to take those instead of the Warthog and go for the run in a completely unique way, and it is really cool. Since this level does have scripting based around whichever the front player is, it makes strategizing and working with your teammates essential for being able to get this achievement, as everybody has to stay close together in a pack and kind of drive through it together, and that could take some coordinating, and in general the Ghosts move a lot slower than the Warthog at max speed on this specific level, so it makes traversing this area a different experience, and in some ways more challenging when Ghosts start flipping or you don't land something as easily as maybe you could in a Warthog. But then let's take it a step further. This level has a secret Mongoose hidden over in this corner that you could choose to do the Warthog run in, and that's just hilarious. The Mongoose can flip quite a bit, and in general it can become a chaotic experience. If you've ever played 4-player co-op and one group's in a Warthog and the other group's in the Mongoose, while the Warthog's the safer vehicle for sure, you're not having nearly as fun as the two that are just cruising down hoping to survive in the Mongoose, and I think that that is definitely worth noting. And then if you're on heroic difficulty, there's a chopper that spawns at the beginning, and you can experience it in the chopper as well. Now the chopper itself, it's not really all that hard to make it through this. It's a pretty fast vehicle, but if you're like us who decide to try to stack everybody onto a chopper which doesn't have seats for more than one person, that was a whole different experience that we did go for, and boy was that actually really hard. Yeah, this level's awesome. It just lets you go through this crazy obstacle course for driving with all sorts of vehicles. Okay, greatest driving levels of all time. I think if we're gonna like look at the Warthogs and the Ghost and the Mongoose, this last level of Halo 3 still just takes the cake because you can drive in any of the vehicles. Similarly speaking, Uplift Reserve was another great example of diversity in vehicles and also having a level that's fun to drive no matter what vehicle you're in. And ultimately, I think those two levels stand out way beyond any of the other levels because of the fact that they are usable no matter what vehicle you're in. So what did you think? Did we miss a core level that you think was super awesome for driving vehicles in? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. Make sure you are subscribed and notifications on for more videos like this. Huge thank you to our patrons for supporting our channel, keeping this channel afloat in these trying times. If you got a few dollars burning a hole in your pocket you want to throw our way, it does go way further than you might expect by pledging a few dollars to our Patreon. But yeah, you can even get your name here in the credits, which is kind of cool. Otherwise, that's it for today. We'll see you guys next time with a brand new video.